Hello, this is the activity that follows the Battle of Vimy Ridge presentation. And before we get into that, I have a question for you. The gentleman whose picture you see standing in front of the airplane on the screen, he's one of Canada's best pilots in the First World War, probably the best. Does anyone know his name? And here's a little hint for you. First name, first initial B, last name, first initial B. First name, 5 letters, last name, 6 letters. Who is that? Okay, a few more seconds. 3, 2, 1. It is Billy Bishop. Billy Bishop. Okay, on to the activity. So the name of the activity is Battlefield Reconnaissance, and the goal is to duplicate the placements of the Canadian soldiers and the German strongpoints prior to the beginning of the battle at Vimy Ridge. So how does this work? Well, we're going to aim for groups of 5. 5 is an ideal number for this activity, but if you have groups of 4 or 6, that works fine too. I wouldn't do it with 3. I don't think that's enough. So aim for 5. Each group is going to have one person that's the all-time mapper. Okay, and the mapper's job is to arrange objects on a map. The mapper is the mapper for the whole activity, meaning that they cannot fly. Okay, and the mapper is always at headquarters, so headquarters is your table. The map they are going to be using looks like this. Okay, and the objects that they are going to be arranging look like this. So every group should have 11 pieces here. So we can see the top row, there are 4 pieces, 3 pieces, 4 pieces. So that's a total of 11. Make sure you have these cut out because you need to be able to move each one individually. So just to reiterate, the mapper is going to arrange those objects on the map upon the direction of the pilots. Okay, so the other group members are going to be a reconnaissance pilot. And the pilot's job is to fly over to the battlefield where I have my air photo and my objects already set up. They have 20 seconds to look at that and study it and try to memorize it. And then they fly back, basically walk or run across the room and describe to the mapper how to arrange the objects. Now, there are 2 catches with this. First off, you cannot use your hands. Okay, so when you're describing to the mapper how to arrange the objects, you can only use your words. Keep your hands behind your back. And the other catch is that you can't use your phone. Okay, you can't take your cell phone over, take a picture, and then bring it back to your group and say, hey, let's do this. That doesn't count. Okay, so no pointing and no phones. And how will this work? Well, once we start here in a few minutes, when I'm finished explaining, I'm going to say, okay, mappers, raise your hand. Mappers, raise your hand. And once I see that each group has one mapper selected, the next thing I'm going to do is say, okay, first pilot, raise your hand. First pilot, raise your hand. And once I see that each group has first pilot, I'm going to say go. And then those first pilots all together go over to my battlefield map and my objects. And then I'll do a countdown of 20 seconds. And they go back to their group and describe how to arrange the objects. And I'll do the same thing for the second pilot. I'll say, okay, second pilots, raise your hands. Second pilots, raise your hands. Okay, so we'll go through like that. Now, just a couple comments. You don't have to stay, like if you don't need the full 20 seconds, that's okay. You don't have to use it. You can fly back to your headquarters early if you'd like. It's really up to you and your group. Yeah, so have fun and remember, no pointing and no phones. Okay, now that everybody's had a chance to fly, we're going to go over the solution. So the solution is going to come up on the next page in 3, 2, 1, here it comes. So each group has this map, okay? And I'm going to talk you through what you should have on your map. So first off, on the left-hand side, this is where the Canadian divisions were located. You should have this, okay? So you should have the 1st Canadian Division down here near the bottom, up close to the front line. The 1st Division always wears a red shoulder patch. Okay, so if you ever see a Canadian soldier out in public and they have a red soldier or shoulder patch, you know that's a soldier from the 1st Division. Above that, you should have the blue 2nd Canadian Division tile. Okay, above that, the 3rd Canadian Division. And near the top, but not right at the top, near the top, you should have the 4th Canadian Division with the green shoulder patch. Okay, now let's look at the high points on the ridge. You should have this. Okay, so at the top, you should have the 125 flag, and 125 means 125 meters above sea level. Below that, you should have the 145 flag. Okay, 145 meters above sea level, which you'll recall from the presentation. This is the hill upon which the Vimy Memorial was built, and you can actually see it on this map. It's that white square right above my icon there that I'm moving around. So this is the location of the Vimy National Monument. Now below that, you should have the 130 flag, and here the last one is the 135 flag, and it's going to be between these two villages. Okay, so just to comment, at the top, hill 125, that was the last position to fall during the Battle of Vimy Ridge. It fell on it was 4 days after the battle begun. The 4th Canadian Division finally took it. Now on the right-hand side of the map, this is where you can find the German divisions, and they are, as you can see now. So at the bottom, you should have the 1st Bavarian Reserve Division, just kind of directly east from the Hill 135. Above that, you should have the 79th Reserve Division, okay, just between Hill 145 and the village here. And then at the very top, you should have the 16th Bavarian Division, okay? And just a reminder that this position here was the last to fall. These guys here defended it very, very well. So that's what you have. And when we look closer at the map, we see that the front line is here, obviously, because this is where the divisions are lined up. After the first day of the battle, the front line was actually here. So the Canadians had taken all of these positions. Now they held the areas around here, but they didn't take this position yet. So this line should actually, well, it's kind of fuzzy in here actually. And then after the 4 days of battle, the Canadians were all the way over here. So these divisions had retreated. So the next portion of the activity is a debrief. We're going to discuss the experience and some of the difficulties and challenges that you faced and the solutions that you come up with. And teachers, if you want to just turn the video off now and carry on your own, that's completely fine. Otherwise, I'll go through this as well. So first question I'd like to ask everyone is describe any challenges that you experience. So I'm going to ask that question to the mappers first. Mappers, what sort of challenges did you face and what sort of solutions did you come up with? Now, inevitably, the mappers mentioned that the communication was difficult at the start, but usually over time their group chose a set of directions, either up or down or left or right or over or those things. Sometimes we actually have nose pointers where people are using their head gesturing to the mapper where to move the objects. Some students will say they would divide the map into quadrants. So their solution would be to give each pilot a task. So there's all sorts of things here that the mappers can say. Then I ask the same thing to the pilots, and the pilots will inevitably say memory. They had a hard time remembering the positions. They also tried to come up with a set of vocabulary, lingo that they could more easily communicate accurately with the mapper. One of the things that I find interesting about this is that hardly ever do the pilots mention stress, and almost always they are running over to the map. And I find it interesting that they never mention stress. And I remind them that in reality, these pilots were getting shot at all the time. So very high stress. And just a little note, if you're doing this activity with younger students, there's quite a bit of chaos the first few flights, so it's not a bad idea after the first or second pilot to just stop everybody, put everything on pause and just say to them, all right, I'm going to give everyone 1 minute to discuss amongst your group some strategies so that your next few flights can be more effective. And that pause and prompt to them to just stop for a second and think this through almost always leads to better outcomes at the end of the activity. The older kids, their brains are more developed and they're much more able to adapt on the fly and communicate with each other to come up with solutions. So keep that in mind. Okay, on to this second portion here. How could the challenges be avoided? So this is basically a question about solutions. So ask the students what they did in order to overcome these challenges. Next, which character traits were most important for the mapper or pilot to possess? Well, the usual things, speed, memory, communication is the major character ability or language ability that dominates this activity. And then lastly, what tools could a team use in order to better ensure success? Now, I said no cameras, right? Now, cameras were used in the First World War. I just decided to X that out for this activity because it makes it too easy. But cameras were used, so that's one possible solution. Grid coordinates. So you could use math. You could overlay a grid on top of the map and give grid coordinates. Yeah, those types of things. The more you do this activity, the more you'll get a feel for what the answers are going to be and how you can make good points about what the students did. So that's about it. And the way I like to close this activity is by saying that due to the technological change in the First World War, the generals and commanders and soldiers were faced with many unforeseen problems with which they had to struggle for a while in order to come up with solutions that would work. And essentially, that's what the students just experienced. They knew that my map and my objects were over there out of sight. They didn't really know what they were getting into. The first pilot had the most difficult job because they were basically flying blind until they got there. And even when they come back to their group and tried to communicate with their mapper for the first time, there was a lot of struggling. But each time a new pilot flew, they had learned from the previous one. And by the end, the pilots were working much more effectively with the mapper. If we did this activity again with a different map, let's say Passchendaele, I guarantee that the students would get it done better and probably half the time, just because it wasn't a new experience anymore. They already had a plan worked out. And that's an important learning for this activity, right? Like sometimes you have to break a few eggs to make an omelet. And the students learned their way through this activity, and now they know what it is. They could definitely do it better the next time.